August of 1965. Pakistan's incursions into Kashmir were foiled by the Indian Armed Forces with the capture of the vital Hajipir Pass. With the failure of this plan, Pakistan military launched an attack towards Akhnur from the direction of Chumb and Joria. This was a full-fledged attack towards the town with elements of artillery, armor, infantry and close air support. The attack went in the early morning hours of September 1st, 1965, with the plan of capturing Akhnur by September 2nd. The Indian side swung into action to build the defenses of Akhnur, but they needed more time to reinforce it. The only real option to slow down the enemy's momentum was to involve the Indian Air Force into the battlefield. Army Chief General Chaudhry had a quick conversation with Air Force Chief Air Marshal Arjun Singh and made him aware of the situation unfolding. Both chiefs agreed on the need for close air support in Chumb and Joria and requested formal approval from the Indian Defence Minister YB Chavan. The approval was granted at 4:50 p.m. and the air base at Pathankot was intimated of the upcoming mission in the region. Indian Air Force planned out 3 waves of attacks from Pathankot into Chumb using their Vampire jets. The waves were to be 10 minutes apart so that when the first wave completes its attack on the enemy positions, the second wave is in position to commence their attack. This was so that they could build momentum into the battle and keep the pressure up on the enemy. The close air support that Pakistan was providing their positions was one of the most advanced fighter jets of the time, the F-86 Sabres and F-104 Starfighters. The Pakistan Air Force had superior equipment owing to their defense cooperation treaties with the US at the time. India, on the other hand, lacked these advantages and hence possessed the much less capable Vampires, Nats, and Mysteers, which were at least a generation older than the ones with Pakistan. Losses were to be expected in the battlefield in case the enemy moved their air force at the right time. First wave, Squadron Leader S.K. Dhar, Flight Lieutenant S. Sahai, Flight Lieutenant I.P. Ahuja, Flight Lieutenant S. Bhardwaj. The first wave of 4 Vampires took off from Pathankot for Chumb battlefield at 5:19 p.m. of September 1st, with the objective of engaging enemy positions around the Chumb battlefield. They flew at 300 knots and only 500 feet above the ground to avoid detection from enemy radar. The plan was to go under the radar, complete their missions, and get back to base. The first wave started targeting Pakistan positions, destroying multiple tanks and infantry vehicles. They did 3 passes over the battlefield, did some real damage to enemy, but as soon as they were getting out, 1 Vampire jet was shot down by the enemy ground fire. The other Vampires completed their attacks and got back safely. Meanwhile, the Pakistan Air Force was anticipating an action from the Indian Air Force and was keeping a close watch on any movements in and around the area. Pakistan Air Force's squadron leader Sarfaraz Rafiqi and Flight Lieutenant Imtiaz Bhatti engaged their sabres against the Indian Vampires. The second wave of Indian Vampires were closing in on the battle area. Flight Lieutenant A.K. Bhagwagar, V.M. Joshi, W.M. Sondhi and S.V. Phatak. India's 230 signal unit identified the presence of enemy aircrafts in the region, but they had no idea that the Indian Air Force was operating in the Chumb region and may need this information. Their SOPs only included providing information to the sector army formations, which they instantly did. There was clearly a lack of communication here on the Indian side, due to which the Indian Vampire second wave did not receive any warning of enemy presence in the region. The second wave of Indian Vampires reached the battlefield and were orbiting the general area when Rafiqi spotted 2 Vampires out of the 4 and dived onto them from 20,000 feet. Bhatti provided tail cover to Rafiqi. Rafiqi got behind Bhagwagar and Joshi. Sondhi and Phatak saw this happening and maneuvered their jets quickly to get behind Rafiqi. Bhatti, who was present on Rafiqi's tail, saw this happening and got behind Sondhi and Phatak. Rafiqi saw an opportunity and shot down Joshi and immediately started chasing Bhagwagar. Sondhi got close to Rafiqi and was about to shoot him down. That is when Bhatti warned Rafiqi about a jet getting close to him and advised him to brake. Rafiqi quickly fired at Bhagwagar and broke hard. The last fire hit its target and shot down Bhagwagar as well. Sondi fired at Rafiki but missed. Bhatti was behind Fatak and fired at him and missed. He then spotted Sondi and fired at him as well. Bhatti missed Sondi and Sondi was able to get back to base. Fatak, on the other hand, faced some technical glitch and had to eject from his aircraft. By this time, the third vampire wave had been engaged. Since this was all done in a haste, they were not properly briefed on the locations of enemy targets. They went up till Akhnur, did not find any enemy targets, so they came back to base. The Indian side now was aware of the losses suffered by them. This was a major setback, but the job was still not finished. The Pakistan ingress had to be halted one way or the other. So they dispatched multiple sorties of Indian Air Force's Mysteers to support the Indian side in the battlefield. The first sortie got airborne at 7:05 p.m. It was already dark. They reached the general battle area based on the briefing and then saw enemy tanks burning and vehicles in the vicinity. They used these as guides to attack the enemy formations around them. Multiple sorties of 14 Mysteers did some major damage to the enemy in the Champ-Joria area. By the end of the day, the Indian force had suffered major losses in the battlefield, but the Pakistan ingress had halted in the Joria region. The Indian side lost 4 Vampire jets on day 1. Much of it was due to Vampires being an obsolete jet against the Sabres. Add to that, not having intel on Sabres being in the vicinity put the Indian Air Force at a significant disadvantage compared to the Pakistan Air Force. But engaging the Air Force with the objective of slowing down the enemy ingress towards Akhnur was the right decision. The Indian Air Force went in on short notice and was able to break enemy's momentum in the region. The enemy was on course to reach Akhnur by September 2nd, but was forced to halt their progress by the evening of September 1st itself. This bought the army some time to set up defenses in and around Akhnur. The Indian side, meanwhile, learned from its mistakes of utilizing the outdated Vampires against Sabres, introduced Nats in subsequent operations.
अगर तलवार की नोक पर या एटम बॉम्ब के डर से कोई हमारे देश को झुकाना चाहे, दबाना चाहे, ये देश हमारा दबने वाला नहीं। तो एक सरकार के नाते हमारा क्या जवाब हो सकता है सिवाय इसके कि हम हथियारों का जवाब हथियारों से दें। आपसे इतना ही निवेदन करूंगा कि आज देश में हमारे लिए एकता की जरूरत है, मेल की जरूरत है। जिस झंडे के नीचे हम आप खड़े हैं और आज बैठे हैं, आज इसकी हिफाजत और इसकी रक्षा का सवाल, इसकी शान बनाए रखना है। ये कायम रहे, हम रहें या न रहें, लेकिन ये झंडा रहना चाहिए और देश रहना चाहिए।
The Pakistan ingress had to be halted one way or the other. So they dispatched multiple sorties of Indian Air Force's Mysteers to support the Indian side in the battlefield. The first sortie got airborne at 7:05 p.m. It was already dark. They reached the general battle area based on the briefing and then saw enemy tanks burning and vehicles in the vicinity. They used these as guides to attack the enemy formations around them. Multiple sorties of 14 Mysteers did some major damage to the enemy in the Champ-Joria area. By the end of the day, the Indian force had suffered major losses in the battlefield, but the Pakistan ingress had halted in the Joria region. The Indian side lost 4 Vampire jets on day 1. Much of it was due to Vampires being an obsolete jet against the Sabres. Add to that, not having intel on Sabres being in the vicinity put the Indian Air Force at a significant disadvantage compared to the Pakistan Air Force. But engaging the Air Force with the objective of slowing down the enemy ingress towards Akhnur was the right decision. The Indian Air Force went in on short notice and was able to break enemy's momentum in the region. The enemy was on course to reach Akhnur by September 2nd, but was forced to halt their progress by the evening of September 1st itself. This bought the army some time to set up defenses in and around Akhnur. The Indian side, meanwhile, learned from its mistakes of utilizing the outdated vampires against sabers, introduced gnats in subsequent operations. They also devised a plan to trap the enemy by taking advantage of its probable overconfidence from its success on day one. The plan was to fly 2 Mysteers as a bait for Pakistan sabers. The Mysteers would fly in towards the battlefield in such a manner that they get quickly detected by the enemy. Pakistan would then send in their sabers and starfighters to intercept the Mysteers. What would be unknown to the enemy that 8 gnats would also be following the Mysteers at a low height so they cannot be detected. And as soon as the enemy aircrafts come in, the Mysteers will quickly dive and leave the battle space while the gnats attack the enemy jets. The plan sounded good, but had to be executed with proper precision. September 3rd, 1965, 0700 hours. As planned, the Mysteers started to move towards the Akhnur area at 300 knots and 1500 feet to imitate a vampire. This would ensure these will be quickly detected by the enemy. At the same time, 2 waves of gnats moved at 300 feet above ground level to avoid detection. Detecting air movement in the region, the Pakistan side directed 3 sabers and 1 starfighter towards the battle space. The Mysteers, after showing themselves to the enemy, quickly dived and went back to the base. Seeing this, the first 4 gnats rapidly gained elevation to engage the enemy. The second wave also followed suit, but kept itself 3,000 feet below and 1,500 yards behind the first wave. This was to avoid detection of the second wave. With this ascent in elevation, the enemy could spot the gnats. As planned, they spotted only the first wave and got behind them in an attacking position. This is when they were in the Indian Air Force's trap, because now they had unknowingly positioned themselves between the first and the second wave of Indian gnats. Now they were the ones being hunted. The first saber that got between the 2 waves was shot down by squadron leader Trevor Keeler. This was independent India's first air-to-air kill. The first wave, however, still had 2 sabers and 1 starfighter on its tail. By the time the Pakistan side realized the presence of more gnats in the space, they tried to get out of the situation. This is when Flight Lieutenant Patania outmaneuvered these jets and quickly engaged them. This ensured the enemy did not get a chance to attack any of the gnats in the space. The gnats by now were running out of fuel, so they had to disengage from the enemy. The Indian side ensured that the enemy did not get a chance to attack them, and they returned safely back to base. All fighter jets, except 1, returned safely back to base. Squadron leader Sikand was unable to maintain position and ended up in enemy territory, where he landed in Pasrur, Pakistan, and was taken as prisoner of war. In this mission, the Indian side shot down a saber and forced 2 sabers and a starfighter to flee the battle space. Considering these were much superior machines compared to Indian jets, this was a supreme response to the Pakistan Air Force in the air battles of 1965. The next day, following similar tactics of outwitting the enemy, the Indian Air Force shot down 2 more sabers in the Jauria sector. Now, it was September 5th, 1965, and by now, the Indian Air Force had played a decisive role in breaking the enemy momentum towards the vital town of Akhnur. The Indian Air Force destroyed close to 100 enemy tanks and many hundred of their other vehicles and equipments during its raids. This bought the Indian Army time to build its defenses at Akhnur. Soon, the Indian side crossed the international border and opened a front towards the vital enemy city of Lahore.